What is trauma and how do we define it? I think it's important for us to define trauma before we go into how to cope with it. So trauma is basically an experience of horror. It's something that you either yourself experienced, something really awful happened to you, or you were a witness and watched something really horrifying happen to somebody else. In either case, the horror, the terror, the fear that was experienced from this particular event was so overwhelming to your emotional system that it could not be properly processed the way that most other emotions are. Emotions cannot be processed in a natural way, kind of like the way we digest food. There's a natural system for that. There's a natural system for processing all of our emotions. And when we're traumatized or we go through a traumatic event, that terrifying feeling, that feeling of absolute fear, is not ever able to be properly digested or processed in the emotional system. And it kind of gets stuck and it sits there and can be easily, that feeling of horror or that of terror or horror can be easily triggered by any kind of event that might look, sound, smell, taste, feel similar to the originating traumatic event. So when we're traumatized, when to use that word traumatized or to have post-traumatic stress disorder means that we're very easily brought back, or some people use the word trigger, we're very easily triggered or brought back to that original feeling of horror or terror, absolute fear that we experienced in that actual traumatizing event from many other things. If you go through this traumatic event, then what to expect. So after we're traumatized, we get really thrown off because it's something that was surprising, that we weren't expecting. And even if we were maybe had an inkling that this thing might happen, usually human beings, we try to tell ourselves it's not really gonna happen. It'll never get that bad, it'll never go to that. And then when it does, we can be traumatized. So what do we do with this trauma? And initially when we're traumatized, probably for 6 months to a year after that, we feel a little thrown off. We feel a little unstable emotionally. And we may or may not be aware of that, but what will happen is we will find ourselves preoccupied with that event, the traumatizing event, or things that happened as a fallout of that event. We may find ourselves operating in a sort of a heightened level of fear, a heightened level of fear, or a heightened level of sensitivity to things around us, like sight, sound, smell, touch, anything that could possibly remind us, trigger us to go back in our minds to that moment. And our bodies will go back with us. So the body will react with the elevated heart rate, muscles, aches and pains, stomach aches, headaches, rashes, all kinds of disease and illness and sickness can happen to the body from trauma. So it's a very serious thing, and it really does require some help. And of course, we're going to talk about what you can do to kind of help that trauma and how to deal with it. But you want to expect in the beginning to be forgetful, to maybe be tearful, more so than usual. That it's almost like your emotional system has been shocked and the wires have been pulled out and you're sort of short firing everywhere. And this is what the experience of being traumatized sort of looks like. So in the extreme, when we think of PTSD, we tend to think about, war vets who, come back home after, combat, and loud noises or sounds of gunshots or even watching war movies will bring them back to those traumatizing moments, those multiple moments of traumatization. So when you're in combat, you're being traumatized, you're being exposed to trauma and traumatizing events regularly, daily. So that can really be difficult to cope with. So again, it can be the loss of a relationship. It could be, a really awful fight that you had with your partner or someone that you love, or the loss of somebody you love, the death, the illness, violence, any of those things that they're not a norm in our culture can be traumatizing.